Greg Rousseau gets a contract extension. Von Miller gets released. All this as the NFL's negotiating window is set to open. We got a lot to cover today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. There's been a lot of Bills news since the last time we had a chance to talk, including a contract extension for Greg Rousseau, a contract extension for Reed Ferguson. Von Miller's been released. Sam Martin's been released. There's a big change in the Myles Garrett story. And, of course, the NFL's negotiating window opens on Monday at noon Eastern time. That's March 10th. So there's going to be a lot happening. There's been a lot happening as really the offseason feels like it really gets going now with all the player movement that has already happened and that is expected to come. So let me just say that right off the bat. This is going to be a unique week on the podcast where we're expecting a lot of news, and so we're going to react to a lot of things. And so just keep in mind that podcasts are going to be posted regularly, but maybe not just once a day. There could be some days where we have enough news to get a couple of shows in. And so head on a swivel this week as I do my best to get you reactions to all the things that are going on with the Buffalo Bills. So let's get caught up right now. We'll start with the biggest news of the weekend, and that is Greg Rousseau signing a new deal with the Buffalo Bills, a 4-year, $80 million extension. Greg Rousseau, of course, turns 25 in April, so still a young player. This deal comes in at $20 million a season, and most importantly, the percentage of cap at signing comes in at 7.16%. And so with that in mind, Greg Rousseau, in terms of percentage of cap at signing, comes in as the 18th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. And as you know, it's very important to me that we talk about contracts, especially when we're going to compare them to other deals at the same position through the lens of percentage of cap at signing. The caps went up $53 million over the last 2 years. It doesn't make a lot of sense to compare APY, average per year, and deals that are signed today versus 2-3 years ago. It's not the same conversation. So percentage of cap is what makes sense. And so at 7.16% of cap at signing, Greg Rousseau, the 18th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. That's just below Jonathan Grenard and just above Bryce Huff and Zach Allen. And so I think that's a very appropriate place to put Greg Rousseau. You know, this isn't a situation where you should be having sticker shock thinking, oh my goodness, $20 million a year. Well, yeah, that's a ton of money, but not really relative to what defensive ends are getting paid. And so I think this is a very fair deal in terms of where it comes in. Most projections were having Greg Rousseau closer to $25 million a season. And so this comes in, I think, at a very reasonable number. Now, this should create some cap space for the Bills this year. Of course, Greg Rousseau was playing on the 5th-year option, which is a firm $13.4 million. And so I'm guessing the Bills took this opportunity to kind of reduce that number for this year, spread it throughout the duration of the deal, and get some cap relief this season. We don't know exactly how much, but there should be some nice cap relief from this extension. Now, one thing that I want to bring up with Greg Rousseau, because I think very highly of Greg Rousseau. I'm very excited about this contract extension. I've watched every snap of Greg Rousseau's career. I see an ascending young player that is an A-plus run defender. That's a B, probably a B-level pass rusher. He's not a sack artist, but he's still a very good pressure player that means a lot to the Bills defense. I think outside of Josh Allen, I think he's been Brandon Beane's best first-round pick. And so I'm very excited for Greg Rousseau to stick around, but it feels like maybe that's not an opinion shared by everyone, and that there's some people out there that don't think that Greg Rousseau is that good of a player. I disagree with you, and I would love to study the tape with you and show you just how effective of a player he is. But one thing that I feel like there's some thought out there is that, Greg Rousseau's not Nick Bosa or TJ Watt or Myles Garrett. You're right. He's not. And he's not paid like those players either. Those players are getting 14, 15, 16% of the cap. And so let's get the right perspective here on Greg Rousseau. Nobody's getting him confused as Von Miller in his prime. Nobody's saying that. But he's a really good starting defensive end. That means a lot to this defensive line. And boy, if the Bills didn't have Greg Rousseau, they'd be a lot further away from finding the right mix of players up front for this defensive line. And so I think this comes in at a very reasonable amount. And I do believe that Greg Rousseau is an ascending young player. And that's because the film clearly bears that out. I mean, this guy isn't even 25 years old. He's a guy that only had 1 year of production at the defensive line in college. He was a safety and a wide receiver in high school. And so I'm excited to see how he continues to ascend in the NFL. And I think he's coming off of a good season. 16 games, 16 starts on the field for 71% of snaps. And that's kind of interesting. Like, Greg Rousseau's percentage of snaps played has just gone up and up and up. As a rookie, 49%. His second season, 56%. 2023, 60%. Last year, 71%. So he's commanding a high percentage of snaps. Gave 53 tackles, 16 for loss. Had 63 pressures. The next highest amount of pressures on the team was 39. Number 3 was 32. So Greg Rousseau gave you 63 pressures. Number 2 and number 3 gave you 71. Greg Rousseau had 8 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. And I think highly of Rousseau. Again, A-plus run defender. I think he's the best pass rusher on the team. And I think that as the Bills can get better talent around him on this defensive line, that's only going to help Greg Rousseau. He's not Batman, right? Like, don't get it twisted. He's not Batman, but he could be a heck of a Robin. And I think that if the Bills get a legit answer, whether they trade for Trey Hendrickson or they sign a Josh Sweat, that's really going to unlock even more for not only Greg Rousseau, but Ed Oliver. So I'm excited for this defense to continue building around Greg Rousseau. I'm excited for where he's headed in his career. I'm excited for what he's done to this point in time. And, obviously he's a paid player. There's expectations that comes with it. I listened to his press conference. A lot of that was about Greg Rousseau and the overall performance of the defensive line and how it's been perceived as the unit on the team that's kind of let the team down in the playoffs. And Rousseau didn't hide from that. He says, yeah, that motivates us. We want to be better in those bigger moments. And I think that's a fair criticism. And obviously that's going to be a big part of what Greg Rousseau and Ed Oliver have to bring to this team moving forward. But I think that's going to be a lot more palatable for them if the Bills can get, some more talent around them that can allow this rush to really take off. Because I think for as much as we want more impact from the defensive line, there just hasn't been enough impact-worthy players in the arsenal of players. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. I'm over the moon on this deal. I think the world of Greg Rousseau, and I think this is a good deal for the Buffalo Bills. All right, coming up on the other side of it, Von Miller was released. We'll talk about that. Reed Ferguson's extension. Sam Martin has been let go. What's the plan there at punter? Plenty more to get to, folks. Be sure to stick with me. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so that you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, also that you can get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, so Greg Rousseau staying in Buffalo, 4-year extension. Von Miller has been released. And I think this was the right move. This is obviously something I've discussed multiple times. What do you do with Von Miller? And I thought the best path forward was to release him and release him exactly how the Buffalo Bills did. And that's to not designate him as a post-June 1st release. Do it right now. You get $8.4 million in cap savings. You do carry $15 million or $15.4 million in dead cap, but you do get the 8.4 in savings, which I think is the right thing to do. If you post June 1 it, yeah, you get $17.4 million in 2025 cap savings, but you also get a $6.3 million dead cap this year and $9 million next year, and you're carrying the $24 million cap hit until June. Be done with it. Be done with it. There's no reason to continue having to deal with the consequences of Von Miller's release in 2026 by having $9 million less in cap space. Just be done with it. I think the Bills did the right thing with this Von Miller situation. Von Miller turns 36 in March. I feel like he did have a much better season last year. I think I've been one of the biggest defenders of Von Miller in the year that he had last year. But there's not enough there that makes sense to me for him to come back for his age 36 season and hope that there's another level for him to gain post-injury. I'm ready for some new blood. I'm ready for some more upside with who's getting snaps on long and late downs. That's what I'm excited for. I think Von ran his course with the team. And, the reports came through from the different insiders that reported on the release saying that the door is open for a return. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't, if the Bills were going to keep Von Miller, I would like to have think that would have come with a renegotiated deal. You don't need to go through the process of releasing the player and then bringing him back. It's just be done. Just be done. I think that's the right path forward here. And, looking back on the Von Miller tenure, it winds up being a 3-year, $47.3 million contract. That's what it was. Of course, it was signed as a 6-year, $120 million deal. It winds up being 3 years, $47.3 million. And the way that I will always look back on the Von Miller era in Buffalo is that, my goodness, before that ACL injury, he was everything Brandon Beane signed him to be. And then it's just unfortunate. He's 33 years old and tears his ACL. You wind up losing the rest of that season. You pretty much lose the next season, and he's a shell of himself in 2024. If he never blows out his knee, what does this look like? We'll never know. But I think that's the unfortunate part of it. Is it a black eye? Sure. But it's just unfortunate that the guy blew out his knee, because before he blew out his knee, he was everything he was signed to be. And it's just unfortunate. So ultimately, it's not we're not going to look back on this deal as a big win for the Bills, right? Certainly don't look at it like that. But it's also very unfortunate that the knee injury really changed the entire course of where that deal was going and what it was going to look like, because it looked like it was going to work just fine. And then unfortunately he blew out his knee, and you're in your mid-30s. It's tough to come back and be the player that you once were. Now, I think one thing that does excite me about Von Miller being gone is that Greg Rousseau is a better left side player, and I think that was kind of a detriment to Von being around, is that Von Miller got all those rush snaps as a left side player. Kind of puts Greg Rousseau in a position now he's rushing more off the right side, which is not his better side. And so I think maybe there's an added bonus to Von Miller not being around, that, Rousseau can rush more from the position that he rushes best from. All right, let's talk about some special teams moves here. Reed Ferguson has been re-signed and Sam Martin has been released. So Reed Ferguson, Bills long snapper, signs a 4-year extension with the team, longest tenured member of the team. And look, the commentary here is very easy. I've said this all the way through. Don't mess around. You get a good long snapper, just keep that guy forever until they're done playing. Reed Ferguson's been a good long snapper. He's been a leader. He's embraced Buffalo. There's no reason to be messing around with long snappers. You got a good one. Keep him around. And obviously he's going to have an important job this year. Not that he always doesn't have an important job, but there's going to be a new punter. because the Bills, hold on, we don't have the money on the Reed Ferguson deal, but long snappers don't really get paid a ton. So I'm sure it's a market value contract for a long snapper. But the Bills did release Sam Martin, and this is something we've talked about as a possibility because the Bills could free up, almost $2 million in cap space. They saved $1.9 million in cap by releasing Sam Martin, who just turned 35 years old. I think he's a perfectly average NFL punter. Last season, actually metrically very poor. He was 25th in the NFL in EPA per punt. So that's pretty poor, but I think he's probably an average punter. And when you looked at the cap savings that could be had, and you also combine that with the Bills signed a pretty, somewhat exciting young punter and Jake Camarda to a futures contract, the writing was kind of on the wall here. And so Jake Camarda, a 2022 fourth round pick out of Georgia. That's a high pick for a punter. He's drafted by the Bucs. He was the Bucs punter in 2022 and 2023, had a couple of pretty good seasons. And then he was released in October of 2024 for performance. He actually had a very, very poor start to the 2024 campaign. And you look at his metrics and his hang time and distance and all that stuff, it just was nowhere where it needed to be. And I kind of did some reading on this. It sounded like Todd Bowles wanted to send a message about, performance, and they moved on. They bring in Trent Gill to be the replacement, and, he never got another chance. And so he's kind of waiting in the wings with the Bills. And so, look, is he going to be the answer? I hope so. Is there a chance that he's not? Yeah, there's certainly a chance of that. I think it's troubling that, he got released in his third season after a team drafted him in the fourth round to be a punter, right? That's no small deal. And it was the same coaching staff, same GM that made the choice to draft him. So I put some, weight into that for sure. But we've seen punters in the NFL, get a chance, doesn't work out, they go somewhere else, and all of a sudden they're there for 10 years. So let's hope that's the case with Jake Camarda, who was part of a really good 2022 draft class of punters. Jordan Stout was part of that group. Matt Ariza was part of that group. And, Jake Camarda as well. And, he was a fourth round pick. Now, one thing about Jake Camarda is maybe you're hopeful that he does win the job. He is somebody that you have to bring in competition for, right? You don't hand this over to Jake Camarda. So whether it's a draft pick or, some type of modest veteran signing, I think you want to make sure that there's a good competition for the punter job. And then obviously you got to pick one, right? You got to make sure that you're getting the chemistry down with Reed Ferguson, with Tyler Bass, because now this is going to be the holder, right? So there's going to be a new holder for Tyler Bass this year. That's something to be mindful of. But obviously the Bills took advantage of the chance to save $2 million in cap by moving on from a 35-year-old punter that's average at best. And we'll see what happens next. Hopefully the Bills can lock down this position here with Jake Camarda for a long time. Want to mention Myles Garrett real quick here on Sunday. We got some news here that he has re-signed with the Cleveland Browns, $40 million a year. And it just makes you think, was this whole thing demanding a trade, talking about wanting to play for a contender? Was this just about getting an extension? It feels like it was just a big cash grab. Now, the Browns were pretty unwavering in their position to not trade him, and looks like, they're going to be right about that. But it's like, after all this, you stay there because you get the $40 million a season. What was this always about, Myles? What was this always about, dude? So it's the point being is that Myles Garrett's not coming to Buffalo. And so that dream is over. There's still other ways for the Bills to get pass rush. And I think it's a good reminder of whether it's draft prospects, free agent signings, trades, never marry yourself to any one outcome, because there's so many different things that can happen in the NFL. There's really no certainties. You can't possibly have been sitting here banking on, the only path for you to get an answer at defensive end was trading for Myles Garrett. You can still trade for Trey Hendrickson. And look, Trey Hendrickson's probably going to cost you $10 million less a year and probably a fraction of what it would cost in a trade compared to Myles Garrett. Go sign Josh Sweat. I would love for the Bills to wind up with one of those two players as quote-unquote consolation prizes for not being able to trade for Myles Garrett, who stays in Cleveland on a extension that pays him $40 million a season. All right, coming up on the other side of it, let's talk about what's next. What extensions could be next for the Bills? And then, of course, with the negotiating window set to open, which Bills expiring contracts do we need to be paying attention to, folks? We'll talk about that here on the other side of it. Be sure to stick with us. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Picking my favorites. I've got an eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. You can stay in the action with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, it's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Remember, this deal they got for you. You can get $200 of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on all the great features over at FanDuel. Check it out over at FanDuel.com. All right, folks. It's going to be a busy week. Lots of news coming through. I would love to extend an invitation to you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. We do this all year long where, you get a lot of different incentives, but part of that is, I will send you any Bills news right to your phone through a text message and give you my initial reaction to it. And so as these moves have been coming through, Von Miller release, Greg Rousseau extension, Terrell Bernard extension, Khalil Shakir, Sam Martin release, all this news, I send it to your cell phone whenever it breaks, and then I'll give you, a few thoughts about it as well. So you don't have to dig through social media. You get it right to your phone from me. You also get a lot of other incentives, including access to our Discord channel where we're doing a lot of fun stuff there. There's, 1,600 Bills fans in there talking Bills, talking movies, life, whatever. But also we do a weekly hangout in there called the Herd Hangout, where on Wednesday nights at 8:00, I go live and we talk and we do, sometimes we do trivia contests. I got some football one-on-one stuff that we're doing in there as well. So check out the Locked On Bills subtext community. You get text messaging from me, lots of cool incentives. There's a link in today's show notes to become part of that. I would love for you to get in on the fun there. All right, so let's talk about what's next. Who could be the next Buffalo Bill that gets an extension? Well, obviously Christian Benford comes to mind, the cornerback. I think that'll be a pretty healthy one, right? Another probably north of $20 million a season. And boy, I'm in on that. I think that Christian Benford's comfortably been a top 5 corner the last 2 seasons in the NFL. I'm looking for Connor McGovern, the Bills center. He's not expired, but he's up after this season. And when I say this season, I mean he's up after 2025. The Bills can get some cap relief there and also lock in Connor McGovern, who's been an answer for them at center. Feels like he's got great chemistry with Josh Allen. You can certainly see that one coming through. You could see an extension for Josh Allen. Obviously, as other quarterbacks have gotten paid, Josh Allen's not really paid to the level of quarterback that he is. I think he's like the 14th highest paid quarterback in the league. And so that's just a matter of time. And you could certainly, free up some cap space with an extension there. And then, of course, there's the James Cook thing. If the Bills can get to some common ground with James Cook, you could see that extension coming through. I worry that they're far apart. Brandon Beane said as much. He said, just because we're not on the same page today doesn't mean that we won't be in a few weeks or a few months. So we'll see if that comes together. But the Bills have been pretty intentional about getting these extensions done. I mean, obviously Shakir, Benford, and Rousseau already. And what's really cool about that is, even looking at this year, the Bills last offseason did a bunch of extensions, whether it was, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, Taron Johnson, and you kind of really get ahead of things. And your list of expiring contracts isn't overly daunting. And the Bills are already kind of positioning themselves right now for next offseason to not be staring at a bunch of huge big ticket extensions. And so, I love that where, we'll talk about the Bills' own expiring contracts here in a second, but, think about that as well as not only are you getting these players taken care of early, which is good because their deals only go up typically, but you're also positioning yourself next offseason to not be staring at a bunch of really hard decisions with a bunch of big ticket players. You go ahead and get that taken care of early. If they're your guy, get them taken care of. And I love that there's a system and a culture of that happening in Buffalo. Now, the NFL's negotiating window opens at noon on Monday. And so this is when players that have expiring contracts can start negotiating deals with other teams and agree to terms. And so you could see the Bills lose some players, right? And so a quick reminder on who the expiring contracts are. To me, the three most important ones for the Bills to bring back are Mac Hollins, Ty Johnson, and Reggie Gilliam. I'd like for the Bills to bring those all back. Those are all depth players, but meaningful depth players that I really value what they bring to the table. Mac Hollins, obviously, special teams, blocking, can even play in line a little bit. Culture guy. Ty Johnson is the third down back. Josh Allen said he's the best third down back in the league. Reggie Gilliam is the fullback and a big-time special teams asset. So I'm hoping that the Bills can get something done with those players. But DeMar Hamlin is an expiring contract. He just hired a new agent. We'll see what's out there for him. I don't think much, but you could see him agree to terms with a new team. Rasul Douglas, I feel like the Bills are ready to let him walk in free agency. We'll see what happens. Amari Cooper, the Bills traded for him. Is it going to be just a half-year thing and, see you later? Or they bring him back? I'm totally fine letting him walk. I don't feel like he's the skill set that the Bills need, and I saw a lot of decline in his explosiveness last offseason. Dwan Smoot, the Bills really like the idea of Dwan Smoot. I think they like Dwan Smoot as well. Injuries have kind of been a thing the last couple of years from him. He's on the wrong side of 30. Do you want to bring him back? Austin Johnson, depth player at defensive tackle, kind of was very much a replacement level depth player for you this year. Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Phillips, street free agents that you signed in the middle of the year to help give you a boost to that defensive line. They're expiring contracts. And then, of course, Quentin Morris, who the Bills had as a restricted free agent, but that was going to be about $3 million to bring him back as a restricted free agent. You could probably just sign him to a contract that's less than that, right? Or whoever your tight end 3 is going to be less than that. So we'll see what the Bills do at tight end 3, if it's bringing back Quentin Morris on a lesser deal or if they go in a different direction. We'll see what happens there. But, obviously the Bills have some things to figure out, and we'll start finding out what those answers are on Monday, right? There's hopefully, the players I want. I did my mock offseason. The targets. I've talked extensively about the players I'm hoping that the Bills sign, whether it's Josh Sweat or Josh Palmer or Bobby Brown, Dietrich Wise, Javarius Ward, Paulson Adebo, a lot of different players on my radar. And so I'm excited to see what happens. And obviously we'll be breaking it down all week here on this podcast as moves are made. I'll break them down. We'll get into some film stuff and the Substack as well. So it's going to be a busy week as we start to get an idea for what the 2025 Buffalo Bills are going to look like. And so I'm excited for it. Don't miss anything, folks. Make sure that you are subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Again, posting frequency is going to be all over the place this week. There's going to be a lot of news. So just refresh your feed. You never know when I'll have a new episode in there for you, but it will be frequently. And I'm expecting a lot of activity this week. So come along for the ride, folks. As always, have a great rest of your day. Go Bills! And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.